Hey, it's Ashley. This story isn't about guilt. It's about what happens after the guilt is recorded. The last clean statement lives in a world where words don't just describe reality. They're adjusted until they behave. Where truth isn't erased, exactly, just softened. And when one man refuses to be summarized, the person assigned to clean his language has to decide what her job really is. So lean in. Listen carefully, because sometimes the most dangerous thing in a system is precision. The tape arrived on a Tuesday, which immediately told Iris Ionescu that someone had planned it. Not because Tuesdays mattered, but because they were unremarkable. The kind of day chosen by people who understood that attention gathered around anomalies, not routine. She found the envelope waiting on her desk when she returned from lunch. Plain white, no postage, no return address. Her name was typed, not printed, centered carefully as if alignment itself were a form of restraint. Iris did not open it right away. She had spent the last 12 years teaching herself not to react to objects until she understood their intent. She logged her return time, powered up her terminal, cleared 2 minor requests, and only then slid a finger beneath the envelope's edge. Inside was a cassette tape. Actual magnetic tape, housed in a clear plastic shell. Its spools visible, faintly uneven, as if rewound by hand. A small label had been affixed to one side, bearing a single line of text. Final statement, unedited. Iris closed her eyes. No one used that phrasing anymore. The Language Integrity Unit occupied 3 floors of an otherwise anonymous municipal building. Its windows narrow, its signage deliberately vague. Officially, the LIU handled transcription verification and archival clarification for court proceedings. Unofficially, it existed to clean language before it became permanent. Iris's office was small, soundproofed, and windowless. A single playback deck sat beneath her terminal, its design intentionally obsolete. The city had learned, years ago, that people trusted old machines more than new ones when truth was involved. She examined the tape carefully before inserting it, checking for damage, tampering, novelty. There was none. The cassette was ordinary in every way that mattered. That unsettled her more than threat ever would have. She pressed play. The voice on the tape was calm. Male, mid-40s, if she had to guess. No detectable accent, no obvious stress markers. The cadence was deliberate but not rehearsed, the kind of steadiness that came from someone who had already accepted the consequences of speaking. "My name is Elias Kaur," the voice said. "This statement is complete and requires no correction." Iris's fingers froze above the transcription keys. That sentence alone violated 3 internal guidelines. Elias continued, "I am recording this because I have been advised that my words will be altered once I am no longer present to defend them." Iris stopped the tape. She leaned back in her chair, heart steady but heavy. This was not a confession. This was a challenge. Final statements were never unedited. They were reconciled, contextualized, softened for public record. Not to hide truth officially, but to ensure coherence, clarity, stability. That was the language used. Iris had written it herself, years earlier. She restarted the tape. Elias spoke without dramatics, He described the crime plainly: the location, the time, the method. There was no attempt to justify it, no appeal for understanding. He named the person he had killed, and did so without hatred or apology. "I am not asking to be forgiven," Elias said. "I am asking not to be summarized." Iris felt the familiar pressure build behind her eyes, the one that came whenever language resisted refinement. She flagged the sentence automatically, tagging it for future revision. Then she paused. She removed the tag. Iris did not believe language could be neutral. She had learned that early, long before the Language Integrity Unit formalized it into policy. Words carried weight whether they were allowed to or not, and when they were arranged carefully enough, they could move that weight from one place to another without anyone noticing the shift. That was the work. Not censorship, officially. Redistribution. She listened to Elias Kaur's statement again from the beginning, this time without transcribing, letting the cadence settle into her body instead of her hands. He did not speak quickly. He did not rush toward conclusion. He spoke as if time had already been decided and was no longer worth competing with. "I knew what I was doing," Elias said on the tape. "Not in theory, in practice. I knew exactly how it would end." Iris marked the sentence mentally. Intent, clarity. Public-facing red flag. Under standard protocol, she would soften it. Add contextual framing. Replace certainty with implication. Believed he understood, perhaps. Or reported awareness. Something that introduced doubt without technically lying. Her fingers hovered over the keys. She typed nothing. The guidelines were not secret. They lived in a shared repository, revised quarterly, written in careful language that emphasized responsibility over control. Iris had contributed to most of them. She knew their logic intimately. The way each clause was designed to prevent language from escalating into something that demanded action. She opened the section on final statements. Final statements. Public record preparation. Objective: preserve informational value while mitigating destabilizing impact. Destabilizing was a flexible term. It could mean incitement, panic, or simply discomfort strong enough to provoke questions without answers. Iris scrolled. A subsection she hadn't visited in years caught her attention. Unedited statements may create false perceptions of moral clarity. She exhaled slowly. False, according to whom? She returned to the tape. "I am not asking you to agree with me," Elias said. "I am asking you not to protect anyone from what I chose." Iris felt something tighten in her chest. That sentence resisted modification. Any attempt to soften it only amplified its intent. She tested alternatives in her head, watching each one collapse under its own evasiveness. He stated he did not seek validation felt cowardly. He expressed a desire for transparency felt dishonest. The original stood alone, complete. Iris realized then that Elias wasn't trying to be understood. He was trying to remain intact. She flagged the sentence again. Then she removed the flag. The notification arrived faster than she expected. Editorial anomaly detected. File Kaur Elias final statement. Iris leaned back in her chair, eyes closed. The system wasn't accusing her. It was observing deviation. That was always the first step. She opened the internal review channel and began her response carefully. The subject's language demonstrates unusual internal consistency. Editorial intervention may introduce interpretive distortion. She paused, then added, recommendation. Preserve original phrasing to maintain evidentiary fidelity. She sent it before she could reconsider. The system acknowledged receipt without comment. That silence felt heavier than disapproval. The exception was granted at 03:17. Iris saw it when she checked the system before leaving for the night. A habit she had developed after too many surprises arrived while she slept. The approval came through the same channel as routine notices, phrased in language so neutral, it bordered on congratulatory. Editorial preservation, authorized. Scope, limited distribution. Limited meant internal archives, judicial review, and a public-facing summary that would still be filtered through the usual frameworks. It was not a victory. It was a concession, a way to contain risk while appearing flexible. Iris closed the notice and gathered her things. As she stood to leave, she hesitated, then sat back down and accessed the archive copy directly. She read the full transcription one last time, line by line, listening to Elise's voice in her head as she followed the words. Near the end, a sentence stood out that she had somehow missed before. I know where this will end, Elise said, but I don't know where it will begin again. Iris frowned. That line did not belong in a final statement. It wasn't defensive or declarative. It wasn't even complete in the way such things were expected to be. It sounded more like an observation made too late to be useful. She flagged it. Then, slowly, deliberately, she removed the flag. The first leak was not dramatic. No headlines, no breaking alerts, just a citation in a legal forum, a reference to an unusually intact final statement that had been preserved in full. Someone shared the link. Someone else quoted a paragraph without attribution. The words began to move. Iris noticed the shift the following morning, subtle but unmistakable. Requests referencing the core statement increased. Analysts asked about precedent. Reviewers flagged similar cases for reevaluation. Language was behaving differently. Sentences that would normally have been collapsed into summaries were being quoted directly instead. People were arguing with them, not about them. The statements were not inciting outrage so much as refusing to be resolved. Iris watched this with a mixture of dread and something dangerously close to relief. She had spent her career preventing exactly this kind of friction. Now she wondered what it had been preventing. The call came from a number Iris didn't recognize. She answered it without thinking. You're the editor, the voice said. Not a question. Yes, Iris replied carefully. I wanted to thank you, the voice continued. Younger than Elias. Female. Controlled but tight at the edges. For what? Iris asked. For not fixing him, the woman said. Iris closed her eyes. Who are you? She asked. My sister, the woman replied. I'm the one who kept being told what he meant. The line went quiet for a moment. He didn't need to be better, the woman said. He needed to be exact. The call ended. Iris remained seated, long after the tone faded, the weight of the words settling into her chest. exact. It was a quality the LIU had trained her to distrust. The review board convened 2 days later. Iris sat at the end of the table, hands folded, listening as concerns were raised in language so careful it barely seemed connected to consequence. Terms like precedent, risk, and interpretive burden circulated freely, detached from the sentences that had triggered them. One board member leaned forward. "You understand that preserving unedited language invites misreading," he said. "I understand that editing invites erasure," Iris replied. A pause. "That's a strong claim," another member said. "It's an accurate one," Iris said quietly. The chair cleared his throat. "We're not here to debate philosophy." Iris met his gaze. "Then we shouldn't pretend this is neutral work." The silence that followed was long enough to feel intentional. The reassignment notice arrived that evening. Not punitive, not framed as discipline. Iris was being moved laterally, reassigned to a policy-facing role where her experience could be leveraged constructively. She would no longer handle live statements. She read the notice twice. Then she closed it. The office felt different as she powered down her terminal, the playback deck inert now, its purpose temporarily suspended. She touched it lightly, a gesture she hadn't realized she needed until it was done. On her way out, she passed a junior editor in the hallway, eyes bright with something like urgency. "Did you hear?" the editor asked. "They're revisiting the guidelines." Iris nodded once. "Be careful what you change." The editor smiled. "We're careful what we don't." Iris left without replying. Iris's new office had windows. That alone felt like a message. The light was constant, diffused through reinforced glass that looked out over a section of the city designed to appear orderly from above. Streets curved gently. Traffic moved without interruption. From this height, nothing looked urgent enough to require intervention. Her new role involved drafting language about language. Policy notes, advisory memos, long-form guidance meant to shape future decisions without ever touching a live case. It was safer work. Slower, the kind of distance institutions used when they wanted to keep someone useful but contained. Iris did the work competently. She also watched. She followed the movement of Elias Corr's statement through channels that were no longer hers to manage. It appeared in academic discussions, in legal footnotes, in arguments that refused to resolve cleanly. People quoted it not because it supported their positions, but because it complicated them. The statement had not become influential. It had become inconvenient. The guideline revisions arrived quietly. No announcement, no public explanation, just a set of updated clauses, circulated internally. Subtle changes that would have gone unnoticed by anyone not trained to read for absence as much as presence. Editorial intervention should prioritize clarity, without presuming intent. Iris read the sentence several times. It was weaker than what had come before. Less confident. It left space where certainty used to be enforced. Another addition followed. In cases of demonstrable internal coherence, original phrasing may be preserved to prevent interpretive distortion. Iris felt something loosen in her chest. The system had not admitted fault. It had adapted. That was as close to acknowledgement as it ever came. Iris encountered the statement again, months later, outside any official context. She was standing in line at a cafe when she heard a familiar sentence spoken behind her, quoted casually, stripped of attribution. "I am not asking you to agree with me," someone said. "I am asking you not to protect anyone from what I chose." Iris turned. Two people stood near the counter, arguing softly. Not about the crime, about responsibility, about what it meant to allow someone to own their actions without translation. The sentence moved between them, like an object neither could put down. Iris paid for her coffee and left without speaking. She walked for several blocks afterward, letting the noise of the city settle around her, thinking about how language behaved once it was no longer curated. It did not explode. It persisted. Lias Core was executed on a clear morning. The news cycle treated it as expected closure. The statement was mentioned briefly, framed as an unusual procedural footnote rather than a defining element. Iris read the coverage without emotion, the way she had trained herself to read such things. Later that day, she received a message through a private channel she no longer officially monitored. "Thank you for letting him finish." No signature. Iris deleted the message after reading it once. Not because it was dangerous, because it was complete. The language integrity unit continues its work. Statements are still edited. Records are still clarified. Most words still arrive incomplete and leave safer than they entered. Stability remains the objective, and coherence is still treated as a public good. But sometimes, now, a sentence is allowed to stand. Not because it is comfortable. Not because it resolves anything. Because it is exact. Iris Calder no longer touches the machinery that decides these things. She watches instead, from a place where distance is framed as wisdom. She understands now that this is how institutions survive change, by absorbing it slowly, until it feels as though it had always been there. Somewhere in the archives, Lias Core's statement remains intact. Not celebrated, not suppressed. Present. And in a system built to smooth language, until it can no longer cut. That may be the sharpest outcome possible. That was the last clean statement. Thank you for listening truly, for staying with something quiet and sharp all the way through. If this story made you pause or rethink something you've always taken for granted, I'd love it if you liked and subscribed. It helps these stories travel further than they're supposed to. There's more coming. More fractures. More lines that don't smooth out cleanly. So stay tuned. And thank you for being here.